Hello everyone, this is Andrew LuckyChewy Lichtenberger for Octopi Poker, and this is going to be my second video which is using the beginner's guide to philosophy of poker as the first. And here I wanted to describe different player qualities. So in that first video, if you haven't seen it, you can check out a link up here. And we went over the four sort of pillars of poker mastery, being positions, stack sizes, ranges, and strategies. And then I outlined 10 axioms that I came up with based on those four different subsets of the game, let's say. So here I wanted to expand on that a bit more and describe some of the qualities that you can see in different players and things you should keep in mind when conceptualizing ultimately your strategy. So I basically took those four subsets or pillars of mastery, and then I created a spectrum of sort of how they materialize in actual gameplay. So, for example, for positions, aggressive and passive are kind of the natural distinction between what positions tell us about gameplay. For stacks, flow and tilt, different stack sizes will impact different players differently. Ideally, you always stay in flow, but that's not always what you see when you play. For ranges, they oscillate between being loose and tight. And for strategies, they can be either rigid or flexible based on the player and the scenario. So let's go ahead and explore this a bit more deeply and start back at the top. So insofar as positions go, we're looking at this duality essentially between aggressive and passive play. And really what this is describing, and the reason it's useful, is because you can start to conceptualize and understand based on someone's position why they're playing aggressive or passive. So if you recall, we discussed in the 10 axioms that as you find yourself in later and later position, you can play more hands. Part of doing that is often playing them aggressively. And you could say largely that you want to play aggressively in most cases first into the pot. I think that's a very useful simplification for playing effective winning poker. But the more aggression that you face from earlier positions or later positions for that matter, generally the passive response comes in when we have hands that are worth playing but not worth playing for a raise. So commonly this happens in the blinds facing an open raise. We want to do generally more calling out of either small or big blind relative to other positions. And this changes based on stack size, stage of the tournament, and the player that you're playing against, which would be sort of all of the other categories here. So moving on to stack size, if we look at this disparity between flow and tilt, sometimes you can get a sense of how recent hands have gone for a certain player, and this really pertains to sort of less experienced players as opposed to more experienced players. But this video is really geared towards more beginner type players who are interested in poker. Maybe they've learned a thing or two and they want to deepen their knowledge and understanding. So, you could almost say that this in some ways has a sort of momentum type quality to it. But I think the most useful takeaway is that players who are basing their strategies off of sort of unchanging variables, which would be understanding of ranges, understanding of equity distribution, understanding of stage of the tournament, understanding of the just the nature of the scenario they find themselves in, as opposed to players who are going to, look down at a hand and not even really acknowledge their position, not really acknowledge their stack size, and act a lot more impulsively. So the former category of, the players who are focused on the more unchanging variables would be, more flow based, and the players who are more impulsive or sort of irrational and emotional in their decision making would be more tilt based. And you can sort of, these are they're not hard and fast rules. It's just developing a framework of understanding for being able to problem solve by attaching actual language to the different qualities or aspects of player types that we see. So the third would be the ranges that players play and the disparity between whether they're loose or tight. And again, this is largely going to hinge on both position and stack size. So, based on someone's position, based on their stack size, based on their mood and their general style, this would be, something that you could, in time, discern based on both actual showdown data that you see when players are, you know, getting to showdown, showing their cards, as well as, studying simulations and understanding, what different ranges are meant to look like in different cases. And the strength therein is really being able to take the knowledge of a simulation and see how well it matches up in reality to what your opponents are actually doing. And that is kind of the $1,000,000 question that everybody likes to ask, which is, how do you play poker? Or how do you play different poker scenarios? It's always based on the fluctuation of these different variables. And lastly, the disparity between rigidity and flexibility in terms of strategy. So, it's a nice segue talking about simulations and the way different players will use these to their advantage. Uh, Certain player types in the modern era, and I've certainly been guilty of this myself in the past, will have an understanding of what a baseline game theory optimal strategy looks like, and they won't really look too far beyond that, and they will just look to blindly implement that. Those are the players I would put in a more sort of rigid category. You can also see rigidity in players who don't have in-depth game theory knowledge and more so just have sort of ways that they play hands. But I think that the downside to that is, failing to adjust for everything else that we've mentioned so far in this video and understanding that, really everything is a node lock, if you will. And what I mean by that is your real world opponents are very unlikely going to match up to the way that simulations suggest that they play. But that is not a flaw of the simulation. It's not even really a flaw of the opponent. It's just sort of the way that life and poker work. So the goal therein is to be able to figure out, based on the different qualities of a player, how is their adjustment to a strategy going to take shape, and what does that mean for our response to their strategy? And this can be any number of things. It can be understanding that a player's range is split right from the get-go pre-flop because they're either limping or raising. It can be due to noticing different bet sizing strategies. Some players who are not overtly cognizant of what their bet sizing should be or how it would look with various parts of their range will get caught in this essential quagmire where they're betting too big with certain parts of their range and too small with others, and that can be very easily exploitable. And I think more than anything, what this really leans on is just the very dynamic nature of the game of poker and essentially what that means in context of how do we actually think about responding to the different plays that our opponents are making. And although this video probably doesn't give direct answers in terms of what to do, the reality is that in order to give those direct answers of what to do, you really have to take into consideration all of the unique qualities of the game and see that configuration of position, stacks, ranges, and strategies in isolation from any other. And by doing so, we allow ourselves to explore more deeply what it is that those things tell us about really what that sort of signature frequency of poker is in that snapshot of reality. So if this seems a little bit vague or abstract, don't worry. We're just planting seeds right now for what will eventually bloom into greater understandings and greater depths of understanding poker theory. But yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed this, and please come join our Octopi community, check it out, join the discussion, and feel free to ask questions if you don't understand something. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.